my boss's boss took me to a meeting with Bill Gates. And I saw him and all of the leadership of Microsoft in this room. And, Bill was all about competition. He said, my problem with all of you is you're worried about the competitors we have. I'm worried about the competitors who haven't been born yet. And I need you to look further down the road.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
Thank you, Fat Joe. And who better to echo that pricing sentiment than my guest today, an expert in pricing. Welcome to Run the Numbers, where I interview world-class CFOs, operators, and the investors who fund them on how to get the most out of your company's performance. This podcast is a playbook of sorts for ambitious people in the worlds of finance, strategy, and operations. Today, my guest is Jason Kapp, the founder and CEO of Blue Rocket, a world-renowned pricing consultancy for top enterprise tech companies like Salesforce, Cisco, PagerDuty, Brex, and GitLab. Jason gained invaluable experience working at Microsoft for over a decade, where he worked on the canonical antitrust case that many might recall, which forced Microsoft to consider how it bundled its Office software within the operating system. On this episode, we cover what the vibe was like at Microsoft in the early 2000s under Bill Gates, how pricing is a series of strategic decisions a company makes, where in the org pricing should sit, how often companies should update their pricing, Jason's philosophy on discounting and how CFOs can better work with sales teams to find the right range, and how framing and psychology play a role in how a deal is presented and priced to the end consumer. Jason is an amazing storyteller, and he's able to connect his time at Microsoft, his studies at MIT, and his client engagements to real deals coming across the CFO's desk for either discounting or a pricing adjustment. What struck me the most about his conversations is how pricing is essentially an output of a company's strategy, its chosen customers, its market selection, the channels it uses to reach those customers, and how the company positions itself to sell everything else. While this is a podcast on pricing, it may as well be one on corporate strategy and buyer psychology. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. As a SaaS CFO, I know firsthand how difficult it is to prepare your business for funding. It's not enough to simply know your metrics. You need to be able to tell the story of your business. That's why I'm so excited to partner with the sponsor of today's episode, Maxio, the leading billing and financial operations platform for B2B SaaS. Maxio helps finance teams at top SaaS companies like Chili Piper, Crunchbase, and Stack Overflow get cash in the door faster, automate revenue recognition, and tell their stories with investor-grade metrics. Love it! By building all of your SaaS metrics off the same data set as your financials, you'll avoid major headaches when telling your story to investors and your board. So whether you need to get funded, stay funded, or impress your board, aren't we all trying to do that? Visit maxio.com/run the numbers to supercharge your financial operations in 2024. Not only does requesting a demo using the Run the Numbers link help support the podcast, ya boy, you'll also receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. Please do it. It will be awesome. That's maxio.com/run the numbers, maxio.com/run the numbers. Woo! Quick math. The less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your product or service, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. That's the goal, isn't it? But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more. Yesterday's price is not today's price. So to reduce costs and headaches, smart businesses are graduating to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform and one source of truth. With NetSuite, you reduce IT costs because NetSuite lives in the cloud with no hardware required. Access from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems because you've got one unified business management suite. You improve efficiency by bringing all your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 companies, wow, that's a lot of customers, have already made the move. So do the math. See how you'll profit with NetSuite. Now, through April 15th, NetSuite is offering a one-of-a-kind flexible financing program. Head to netsuite.com/metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. Ooh, yeah, you know your boy loves some metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. Please go there, guys. I really need it. All right, welcome back to the Run the Numbers podcast. I'm CJ Gustafson here with a legend of the licensing, pricing, and packaging world, Mr. Jason Kapp. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for the kind introduction.
Jason, you were at Microsoft for 14 years during pretty legendary run. There were a lot of cool products that came out during that time. There were a lot of times that Microsoft was actually in and out of court, and I'm using a Windows still today. So I got to ask you, what were the vibes like in the early 2000s at Microsoft? What was the culture like? And then maybe I can ask you a couple more specific questions on what you worked on there.
So I joined Microsoft in 1996 and I retired in 2012. It was a great run. So in 1996, when I joined Microsoft, it was about, I want to say there were maybe 25,000 people. And you can kind of know 25,000 people 2 or 3 degrees away, like, oh, they're in the Windows org and they work for so-and-so. And so you kind of get a general sense of how big the company is. When I left, it had 100,000 people or more, and it had over 100,000 contractors. So it was a ginormous company when I left. And in the early days, it was all about how fast can you go. It was a good idea. It was a meritocracy. Did not matter what your title was. Did not matter what your level was. You were just encouraged to be super smart, and you were encouraged to come up with lots of ideas. And I had my ideas beaten up and shot down all the time, and I never felt bad about it. It was not the winning. It was are you competing? Are you in the arena taking a shot? And, I used to call it sort of what's it like to have, the society of brainiacs and cowboys and all these wild personalities. And there were a lot of wild personalities. And it was just like when I got there, I felt like I was suddenly home. Like these were my people. And the one thing that I realized looking back is they took a bunch of type A personalities, they put them together and they said, you are almost good enough. and if you take a really strong competitive type A and tell them they're almost good enough, they will work their heart out. And then when they do something great, you say, no, it wasn't too bad.
Do you think that came from Bill Gates at the top? Was that just his MO?
Yeah, I feel really, privileged in that I was only there for maybe a month and a half, and my boss's boss took me to a meeting with Bill Gates. And I saw him and all of the leadership of Microsoft in this room. And, Bill was all about competition. He told us in that time, he said, my problem with all of you is you're worried about the competitors we have. I'm worried about the competitors who haven't been born yet. And I need you to look further down the road. And it was, a very vibrant kind of culture.
And one of the big projects in quotes here that you worked on was the actual pricing and packaging of the Windows Office suite, Microsoft Office suite, and a couple of the other larger bundles that were well known. What was working on something like that like day to day? Did you understand how big it was in the moment of what was going on?
I did. And with all of the unbridled hubris of a 26-year-old, I remember a friend of mine called me and he said, so what's it like at Microsoft? And I said, well, I learned that they count in commas here. It was just such a big number. And so, yeah, I had a couple of bigger projects. I ran something called the royalty group in OEM when the consent decree came down, Microsoft's second consent decree, which limited how Microsoft priced Windows and how it offered it. And it came from Office being offered in the PC marketplace, in the OEM market, and then Microsoft changing its mind about how it wanted to do that. So me and my lawyer, there were way more people involved. There were a whole bunch of people at Microsoft who were involved in the technical aspects, but the OEM licensing aspect, it was me and a lawyer for 6 weeks. We met 14, 15 hours a day, and we just worked through the contract word by word and the pricing matrix and what can we do that is fair to Microsoft, is fair to the OEMs, doesn't disadvantage Microsoft unfairly, and actually fits the letter of the law. And then we had to roll it out. And that timeline, 60 days, that was a timeline that was given to us by the Department of Justice. And so we, there was no choice. You had to get there. And it turned out actually Microsoft made a lot more money after the consent decree than before. what the Department of Justice had maybe not anticipated is removing negotiation. They required us to have this is an aside, but they required us to have something called uniform terms. And once they did that, that made it so that there was no pricing power for the OEMs. Microsoft published a schedule of pricing based on volume, and that was it. And so they had reduced competition. The competition authority in the United States had reduced competition worldwide.
And Jason, just for the benefit of listeners out there, maybe some of them were either too young to have remembered it, or they're Apple people. I don't know. But what was at the heart of the antitrust law that they were testing with that specific scenario?
Well, the actual complaint was they came up with a theory called monopoly broth.
Okay.
Which wasn't any one particular thing that Microsoft had done, but that by a variety of things they'd created a monopoly broth. And that therefore Microsoft had unfair pricing advantage, particularly over the Windows operating system, and they were using the advantage of Windows, which was a high share product, to get Office actually published, and that therefore they were using one product to get another product, but they didn't have a tie. Now, I'm not a lawyer, not trained as a lawyer, never been a lawyer, and no one has ever asked me to summarize the case. But when I was listening to both the case as it was happening, and I was reading the briefs, and I was talking to our lawyers to try to understand it, it was a new antitrust theory, and it resulted in a consent decree, which is an agreement between the government and a company to behave in a certain way for a period of time. Microsoft actually then took it as a safe harbor. I don't know if they still have it, but a safe harbor says that after the consent decree expires, you say, well, look, I'm going to behave as if I was still under the consent decree because that was legal. We all agreed that was legal. And so Microsoft operated in that safe harbor for years afterwards, as far as I know. I was only in OEM, I think, for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. I guess in layman's terms, I think the government kind of looked at Microsoft and said, you got too damn big, too damn fast, and you're putting all these bundles of software on an operating system that you kind of own distribution to. Is that half right?
That's half right. But again, it wasn't as straightforward as you have done this and therefore that. That's why the broth theory came into to be necessary in order to tie it all together. There was one project. I worked on a bunch of exciting projects. When I was first at Microsoft, there were these two guys who were working on something called electronic software distribution. This is in 1996. We still have dial-up modems. And they were selling Word over the internet. And it took I've got this wrong, but 7 hours to download Word or something like that. And they were still selling some of it. And they said, we think that there's a future in electronic software distribution. And I thought, I don't think you know what you're talking about. And then I went and I worked for the Embedded Systems Group, and they had this thing. PDAs were a thing at the time, digital assistants.
Oh,
and
yeah.
They had your calendar on it, and you could take notes, and it synced with your computer. And these guys actually, so I was on the sales end of that, working out the business model, and these guys came to me and they said, so we've created a PDA that's actually attached to a cell phone. Mm-hmm. And I said, what can you do with that? And they said, well, you could do email and your calendar updates. And I was like, that's brilliant. And they're like, yeah, so you can actually, and this was way before RIM.
That's BlackBerry,
Research in Motion, right? BlackBerry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, this thing's a winner, right? And so we went around and we talked to a bunch of PC manufacturers. We talked to distributors, and I said, this thing's going to go somewhere. This is a big project. And then they came to me one day and they said, hey, Jason, we've actually added a feature. I said, what's that? And they said, yeah, we added a camera. And I said, that's a bridge too far, guys. No one wants that. No one wants a phone that has a camera on it. It's just, So Microsoft ultimately didn't decide to pursue that market. As you know, Ballmer famously said that it wasn't a market that worth pursuing when the iPhone came out. But Microsoft had been there first. And then I went to the commercial, which was global licensing and pricing, worldwide licensing and pricing is the name of the group. I was general manager there. And they had famous things. A few of the listeners will know what an enterprise agreement is, or a Microsoft EA. That was actually part of my group. It's the most famous licensing agreement in technology. And while I was there, we were selling a few things called online services. So we were selling an online dictionary and encyclopedia, and people could access it over the internet. And that was actually kind of interesting. There were a few products, almost no money, that we were actually selling that way. And back now, my career, I'd been at Microsoft for several years by now, and the electronic software distribution thing had gone away. And I thought, this online services is really interesting. So I gathered some executives from across the company, and I said, hey, Allison Watson, who was the channel, she was the head of channels at the time, and my boss was super supportive. And we put together this working group around online services. And we said, let's understand this better so that if in the future it ever comes up, we need it. We know what we're talking about. And one day, the Microsoft decided that Google was becoming disruptive. They had bought some apps, and they had made these apps available online, and they were counter to Office. And Amazon at that time had decided they were going to start outsourcing their infrastructure so other people could use their servers. And so they said, all right, we need a way to coordinate this. Not the technology. That was the product groups did all the technology. But they said, we need a way. We have this really valuable multi-billion-dollar business, $36 billion a year, I think was what I was running at the time. And they said, we have this business and we need to transition this into the cloud. And so they took that little working group that I put together, and it became the Software Plus Services Governance Council. And over 2 years, we actually introduced Office 365, Azure, and Intune. And we learned a lot about what customers did and didn't want, how to actually move from on-prem into the cloud, how do you price it, how do you think about cost of goods, because our COGS were super high for running those things online, but the product group had really good estimates for, they had, I think, a 5-year waterfall, what it's going to cost us today and next year and the year after that. And so we were actually pricing it for the 5th year, not for this year. And so that was my last big project, was introducing what we now call SaaS.
That's crazy. You were on the frontier, pushing the frontier really, of the shift from perpetual licenses, build it and sell it once, to SaaS. That must have been just a mind-blowing thought experiment to show people that we're only going to charge them this much this year, but the lifetime value of a customer, we estimate, big gamble, we estimate will be this many years, and it's actually better.
Yeah, and there are a whole bunch of folks who came out of that working group who were directors, maybe senior directors, who are CMOs and CFOs and presidents of companies around the industry now, that we learned a lot in those 2 years. It was fantastic. I also learned a lot about how to govern big projects. So for instance, we had a no delegation rule.
What's that?
So everyone had to be, myself accepted, you had to be a corporate vice president or higher to actually be a member of the council. And then you had to get an invitation from me to be able to speak. So what I did is I was managing what topics we're focused on and when we're focused on them, because you've got 2 years and you try to think to yourself, when do I need to start talking about channels? When do I need to think about taxes? When do I need to, and so you want to invite those people to, but if a CVP couldn't come or an SVP couldn't come, we did not allow them to send a delegate. It's like, just not represented. And people tested that every once in a while, and my boss was great. He enforced that. And that meant that we had decision makers in the room all the time. So that's what we now do. When we talk about price governance in companies, we actually have a canonical governance committee that every company should have: head of sales, head of product, CFO, and a lawyer. Always good to have a lawyer in the room when you're talking about pricing. And then sometimes they have the head of services. I mean, depending on the company profile, there's 2 or 3 other people that get invited, but we have a no delegation rule. And it ensures that you really are getting decision makers, getting high quality decisions made.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. Financial operations are needlessly complex. Startups have to cobble together a patchwork of tools to reconcile transactions from different sources, work to get a holistic view of cash flow and how it maps to company priorities, and struggle to glean answers from platforms that speak different languages. Simplicity can transform your business operations. That's why Mercury powers your financial workflows from the bank account so you can pay bills faster, stay in control of company spend, and speed up reconciliation. Apply in minutes at Mercury.com and join over 100,000 ambitious startups that trust Mercury. I like that. not just for banking and credit cards, but for the precision, control, and focus they need to transform their financial workflows and perform at their best. Mercury, the art of simplified finances. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Bank and Trust, members FDIC. I always want to do that voice. So you've started your own consultancy, Blue Rocket, where you help enterprise clients come up with their pricing and packaging strategies. And so most people just see pricing as a bunch of numbers, but I look at it really as the output of a series of decisions that a company makes. And Jason, if you were to decompose what pricing really represents, what are the decisions that go into that output?
What a great question. We had a client tell us just day 4 yesterday that this lady said, pricing isn't that hard. You just roll it out and you put a sticker on it, right? And that's the price. And I said, that is a way to price. There are other ways available. So really pricing is about what's your company strategy? So is our strategy to grow fast? Is it to be profitable? Is it to be a niche, or is it to be in the mainstream? So that's your first is probably company strategy. Then your segmentation, what different sets of customers are we going to reach? And what's my value proposition for each of them? My value proposition for, maybe I start with just one segment, low-end customers. And so I have a value prop for them. But when I move up to mid-tier and top tier, I need different value propositions. You need what's your financial strength. So for instance, if you were, I was working with a two-sided marketplace. A two-sided marketplace requires that you actually subsidize one side of the market. And they said, we don't want to. We want to charge both sides. And I think you work for a two-sided marketplace, right? So
that's right. And we have this debate all the time.
Yeah. Well, so this has been well studied for a long period of time. Lots and lots of money have gone into it. You need to subsidize one side of the marketplace. It's the way it works. The canonical example of a two-sided marketplace is a singles bar. So it is.
Never thought of that. That's good.
It's funny, right? But it's easy to understand.
Yeah.
So let's say that it's a mainstream singles bar. So generally the women are free, or they're $5, and the men are $25. So you're subsidizing the one side of the marketplace to actually have a lot of ladies come to the marketplace, and then you're taking your royalties, or your rents, as economists call it, from the male side and from the bar inside, where you charge both sides equally.
I'm going to steal that from you shamelessly. That's great.
It's not unique. I didn't invent it. So
those are some of the tidbits of what goes into a pricing strategy, and we can start to get into each of these as we go here. But where geographically in the org does pricing usually sit? Is it a finance function, a product function, marketing? Is it its own function? Because I've also worked at places where we hired a pricing person once we got big enough.
So our smallest client had 22 employees, and our largest client would be, I don't know, Google Cloud or Cisco or Salesforce. I don't know which of those has the most employees, but very, very large clients. From the largest to the smallest, we've seen it everywhere. And worst, we've seen it nowhere, which is maybe each product manager chooses their own price. We often see it in sales, which is our least favorite place to see it. We see it in product management. We see it in product marketing, and we see it in the chief financial officer's office somewhere. Mm-hmm. And our favorite is product. Because price is a part of product. Products have features, and they have a price for those features and the value proposition. Also, product management is theoretically where you're making P&L trade-offs. What is my investment against what is my return? And so pricing should sit right there and own those responsibilities. If we don't have it there, our second favorite place is with the CFO.
Okay.
Because the CFO is all about capital allocation, which is a similar function, right, of what is my investment and what am I going to get as a return? And so we like it to be there. We like at least in sales, because in sales, it becomes a slave to quota.
Yes. It's kind of like putting a fox in the hen house if you put it in sales.
Right. Or actually, the way it works out is putting a chicken in the fox house. It doesn't last very long.
Out to slaughter. And you should put all of pricing consistently, like for all products, in the same department, right? Because you want someone to look at it like, what can I actually sell off the back of the truck here holistically?
Yep, that's right. So now if you have divisions that sell very different things. So Tata has a consulting company, and I understand they make steel in India, and they also make cars. You don't want a central pricing org for that. You want one for each of those. But if it's all of our steel products, you want one central pricing organization for Tata Steel.
Got it. And now we know where pricing should be, determined or strategized. How often should tech companies think about repackaging their products?
All companies, I think, should have a look at their products every 6 months. Now, tech is a little faster than, say, a car manufacturer. I understand that car manufacturing, we've worked with a few of those in a different area, and they have to think several years out. But you really want to look every 6 months at what your competition is doing. It serves a couple functions. The first function is it allows you to determine whether or not you want to build something new or you have all the parts you need. I've never met an engineering organization that didn't want to build their way out of a deficit, and that's not always necessary. Sometimes reswizzling what you have is more effective than something else. The other thing revisiting it every 6 months does is it allows you to see the competition. So we had a client who we helped them do value-based pricing, and their competitor had a free offering, and they had a low-end offering that was meant to compete with the competitor. And they valued their offering at $64, and they valued their competitor's offering at $14. And what we thought was their offering was not worth $64; it was worth $14, maybe. And so that examination, when you're looking at what I have and maybe repackaging, you're looking at the competition, good and hard, and you're saying, where am I relative to the competition? And if there is a difference, can a customer tell the difference? So for instance, in this case, their competitor didn't do a few things as well as they did, but if you looked on their website, their competitor claimed to do those things, and they claimed to do them better. And, our client complained to us, well, they're lying. And we said, well, that happens in life. So you have to find a way to either expose the truth or you have to actually price accordingly.
And what's the simplest definition of value-based pricing?
So that marketing class. So I went to grad school late. After I worked at Microsoft, I went to grad school. And my marketing professor walked in one day and he said, I'm going to teach you all about pricing. And I thought, oh, this will be interesting. And he said, I learned about value-based pricing in particular when I went with the dean. He said, I just started here and I went with the dean and we went to a car manufacturer. And the car manufacturer, the CEO, had decided that he wanted to have us do a study. And I asked the dean, just before we went into the guy's office, he said, how much are we going to charge? And the dean said, I don't know what the value is to him yet. And he said, oh, okay, how are we going to find out? And he goes, watch this. So they walked in and the CEO said, you're going to do this project. They talked about the project and all the brilliant students that were going to work on the project and how the glory of this manufacturer would rise because of the study. And everybody got really excited. And the CEO said, what's this going to cost me? And the dean said, $400,000. And the CEO frowned. And the dean, without missing a beat, said, "Now that's just phase one." And then the CEO smiled again. And then so the dean then presented phase two, which my marketing professor had never heard of. And so we presented what was going to happen in phase two, and the CEO was nodding along. And he said, "How much is that going to cost?" He said, "That's another $400,000." And the CEO said, "Oh, that's great. That's great." And the dean said, "Now there's a phase three." And the CEO started shaking his head. And the dean said, "But why don't we do phase one and phase two and see where we are before we present phase three?" And the CEO said, "That sounds like a great idea." So value-based pricing is right. In that case, turns out the value was $800,000. And so they just had to find what the value was to the customer. You can't do that always one-on-one. Sometimes you have to do it in a more systemic way, but you can do their pricing techniques like economic value to the customer, where you can estimate what the cost savings or revenue they're going to generate off of it. And then you can take a percentage of that versus the competition or their next best alternative. You can do market-based pricing and get a good sense of what the market is. If I asked you how much a candy bar costs, you would actually tell me within a few cents. Even though we live in different places, you would tell me how much the market price for candy bar is, and I could probably walk across the street and pay the same amount because there is a market price, right? Candy bars are essentially the same price across the United States. But other things like consulting services or MRI exams or other things actually have different prices, and they don't have a market price. And if you don't have a market price, then you have to base it on value.
And value must really come into play if you're operating within a niche and you're not selling something that's like a hard good. So I'll use myself as an example. Like if I want to put a price on newsletter sponsorship or podcast sponsorship, there aren't a ton of CFOs who have a newsletter or a podcast. So you do have to undergo some of this price discovery. If only I could be as clever as that professor was, though, with my sponsors.
Well, another place to actually see value-based pricing is actually an auction. So I'm looking for a particular magazine, an edition from a 2-year range. I read an article and I'd really love to have it. It's not in reprint. I've Googled it. I remember the magazine. So I go to eBay every once in a while and I look for the editions that I don't have and they're being auctioned. And so you can just determine, right, the value is, well, am I willing to pay more than CJ is willing to pay for this particular copy of the Atlantic from, the 19 whatevers, right? And so that's a good sense of market-based pricing.
We spoke with Jack Greco, who is the founder of ACV Auctions, one of the largest online car marketplaces, and he described how they cracked the chicken or the egg problem, which is also, I guess, a pricing problem at the beginning, by forcing everybody into a 20-minute auction at the same time. So it would force this price discovery by getting both supply and demand there for a short window of time.
Right. So then they discover the value of that vehicle, right?
Yeah, they discover the value of the vehicle.
Because all the potential buyers are there.
Yeah.
No, I love that.
Do you ever have clients that push back who are very nervous to change their pricing? Are there any common risks that they identify or think that are out there that maybe can be debunked?
Yes. So founders are particularly troublesome. Founder-led organizations, because the founder says, look, I built this company into the 10 million, 100 million, billion-dollar ARR company that it is by the pricing that I invented back when it was just me. And the truth is, they're right. That is how you got where they are. And so they say, I don't want to upset that cart. But you've outgrown that, right? Your market has changed. Your competitors have changed. You need to outgrow it. And so founders are the hardest for us usually to convince to experiment with other types of pricing. And usually we are hired by the CFO or by the head of sales to help them convince the founder to go in a new direction.
Got it. What are the most common mistakes people make when they sit down and try to compare their pricing to their competitors? Because I imagine that some of the groundwork has to be laid by saying, is there a market price for this and how do I compare to others?
Loyalty, blind loyalty is usually the biggest problem. My product is nearly perfect. It's like a child. My child is perfect. Other children not so perfect, but my child is perfect. And so they have a lot of loyalty to their features. As that example I gave a little while ago, that customer had wildly overestimated their value in the marketplace, and their prices reflected it, and they were losing market share because of it, because the market did not agree with what they thought their value-based pricing was. So the first is overconfidence. The second is feature comparisons. So they look at a competitor and they say, well, that competitor doesn't do everything that I do. And so that's not actually a like for like in the marketplace. No one is going to use that instead of this. When in reality, people are more practical, less rational than that. They say, well, it doesn't do all those fancy things. It doesn't have heated seats, but it does everything I want it to do. So an example is Toyota. Apparently, I read an article that Toyota has a truck that they can build for $10,000.
Really?
It's from Thailand, I want to say, and they're going to actually put it in Mexico, but they're not going to introduce it to the North American market. And part of the article is people say, well, it doesn't have heated seats and it doesn't have GPS and it doesn't have all these things, right? I don't want a $10,000 truck. If I have a work truck, I don't want all those things. Those things only get ruined. I would rather pay 1/5, 1/6 for the truck and have it do the utility, right? So if you were, I don't know how Ford feels about it, but Ford might actually look at that and say, that's not a truck that I need to worry about. Whereas if you were to talk to the landscaping company that does this apartment complex across from my office, they might say, and they drive Ford trucks. They might say, that's absolutely a truck we would buy because we can buy 4 of them instead of 1, right?
Yeah.
So people say because they don't have my features, they're not a comparable product, when in fact they probably are.
Have you ever studied the pricing that the founder of IKEA, or his philosophy of when he rolled out their first products was? It was kind of this debate between low cost versus low price.
Yeah, there's actually the IKEA story is fascinating. They originally, you walk through the IKEA warehouse. I don't know if you know the story, but that was an accident. So on the first day, they couldn't go back and get things fast enough. They didn't have enough personnel to go back and get the stuff that people were seeing on the showroom floor. And some customers wandered through when the employees were in the back. They just wandered through into the warehouse. And then other customers saw them going back there. And eventually the employees threw up their hands and let them go back and find what they wanted.
No way.
Yeah.
So they're just wandering through the warehouse purchasing stuff, and they're like, this works, we'll keep it.
That works, right? And, Costco looked at that. I don't know that Costco looked directly at that, but other people looked at that and said, oh, hey, that works. Think about a Home Depot or a Costco. That's essentially warehouses.
Right. And I think Sam Walton of Walmart and Jeff Bezos of Amazon had similar philosophies that, like, your margin is my opportunity. Like, there's some rub between what the price is and what the value is. And I'm never going to go and be the absolute lowest price, because that's not an equal trade-off. Like, that's not what I'm competing on. I'm competing on how much value can I give you for the price that I'm charging.
So we talk about how we would normally, maybe we'll talk about this later, but we talk about non-price terms. So price is part of the product, as is place, of course. And so what Jeff Bezos is selling is originally what he was selling, because it came from here in Seattle, was, I will keep your address book of all the places you want to send this electronically, so you don't have to figure out those addresses every time you order. And I will keep your payment method right here. That was the original value proposition.
Really?
A long tail, you can order any book, and you don't have to remember your payment method, and you don't have to remember your addresses. And then later it actually became, speed of delivery and other items, but there was these other parts that actually all played into it. I don't remember, I could be wrong, but I don't remember Amazon being advantageously priced initially. It was just that I could get books that I couldn't get otherwise. I could get them easier.
I love these anecdotes of how these companies came to be and their pricing strategies. We can actually dissect that a little bit. So there were pieces of the equation that you couldn't necessarily put a price on, but it made the experience better, is what you're saying.
Right. But I would contend all features are actually part of price. So let's move to a more traditional technology contract. So in a technology contract right now, I'm offering to you, CJ, because I like you very much, you can buy my service at this price, but you have to pay me in 30 days. And the choice of venue and law is Washington State, and there's a limit to my liability, and there's a whole bunch of things, right? And when we go into a company, we ask them to pull us 10 contracts, just randomly give us 10 contracts. And we go through and we identify for them where sales has often traded off some of these very valuable things, but has not seen a net increase in price. So if I'm giving you 3 times as long to pay, there is a time value of money. There should be some consideration for that, right? Or if I'm allowing you to change the choice of venue and law from Washington, where it's convenient for me if anything goes wrong, to the Bahamas, where I don't know if there's a rule of law there or not, but it would be very hard for me to, I don't have lawyers in the Bahamas or some far distant place. There should be a price. All these things have a price attached to them. So we do try to teach that. And not true of big companies, but smaller companies, we also find that they are technically bankrupt. And that's always a really volatile conversation with the CFO. We come back with our 10 or 20 contracts and we say, did you know that unlimited liability has been traded off in 3 of these contracts? And so how do you put unlimited on one side of the equation, right? It doesn't matter what your assets are on the other side. If you have unlimited liabilities, then.
It's so funny because some people probably don't even know that that's a chip that's being traded.
No, actually, it's almost never exposed to the management. So they don't know that they're trading these chips. And so what we try to say is, you need to have a way as an organization that when you trade something, you're getting something for it. Right. Are you getting a speed to close it? So deal velocity, or is your deal closing quicker? Are you getting a better price? Are you getting a multi-year contract? Sometimes when we see this, we're getting the largest customer ever. And so that's really important to us. But you remember the story of Sony, the gentleman who founded Sony. His first real product was a little transistor radio. And he came to the United States and he had I'm making this part up. He had 10,000 of them maybe. And he went to Macy's in New York, or he went to a big department store in New York, and he said, "I'd like to sell you this transistor radio." And they said, "How many do you want?" And how many do you have to sell? And he said, "I have 10,000, or I have however many to sell." And they said, "Okay, that's fantastic. Let's think about it." And they came back and they said, "We want 3 times that many, and we want a price discount." And he went away to his hotel room and he thought about it, and he came back and he said, "In order for me to give you that many, the price per unit will have to be significantly higher than it is right now." And they looked at him with confused faces and they said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Well, I will have to build another factory, and I will actually have to take on all these obligations and inventory, and I will have to hire these employees. And in Japan, we hire for life." And he went through it. He had actually costed out all the things. And they said, "Well, we don't want to pay a higher price." And he said, "Well, I can offer you these 10,000 for this price."
Wow.
And so he sold exactly as many as he wanted to sell at the price that actually that made sense for him. And I love that story, and I'm sure I've mangled that story, but the story directionally, I've told the story correctly. So I love that as a pricing metaphor. We have a lot of companies that we go to, and one of the things that we do is we sit down with the CFO and we say, "Hey, let's review all your customers, and let's look at the ones that you should fire." And they say, "I shouldn't fire any customers." Actually, CFOs are like, "Yeah, we should." But sales are like, "We shouldn't fire any customers." And we say, "Well, let's look at them. How many of them are really profitable?" Generally, 80% of your customers are not profitable. You're making most of your profit off of 20% of your customers. And so we say, let's talk about what price would it have to be at for these customers to be profitable, or at least neutral for us. Mm-hmm. And then what is it that we could do with the already profitable customers to make them more profitable? And it's all just a trade-off.
It all is a trade-off, and part of that trade-off that comes across my desk a lot, and you already mentioned it, is discounting. Jason, what's your high-level philosophy on discounting? Because I've spoken to some CFOs who are willing to trade dollars for speed, and I've talked to some others who are like, the value is what the value is. It's not changing.
So CJ, if I were to survey all the CFOs I've ever talked to in my career, I bet you, I'm checking to see if this resonates with you, 95% of them would tell me that sales gives away too many discounts.
I'd say 99, yeah.
Yeah, 99 said CFOs have a tendency to be suspicious of sales. And I will tell you that if I talk to all the salespeople I've ever talked to, they would tell me that CFOs don't understand how sales work.
Probably.
So we think that discounting actually is an important practice, but it is gold when it comes to a way to raise revenue and to raise margin. Now, the thing about discounting, if I raise 2 points if I just cut discounting by 2%, I actually have a 2% increase in revenue. That makes sense, right? But I actually have an outsized increase actually in margin. My margin will raise more than 2% because my costs are fixed, right? So as a percentage, that will actually go up. Mm-hmm. And so with discounting, what we find is there's a commonly held myth within an organization is that we don't discount too much. Most organizations do not have a good handle on their discounting. So I say, "Can you give me a discount report?" And they say, "Well," and then people start kind of thinking about it. So reasons why discounting is such a great area to explore. Mm-hmm. One is it's easily fixable. For instance, just lowering thresholds. If you actually have discounting thresholds of 10, 15, and 20% for the salesperson, for the sales manager, and for the head of sales, if you actually just make non-rounded discounts, 8%, 14%, and 17%, there is not a deal. I'm willing to go out on a limb and say there's not a deal that would close at a 10% discount that won't close with an 8% discount.
Huh.
So just starting by lowering the thresholds, you'll actually find enough money to hire yourself a great consultant for the rest of your pricing. That's actually how almost all of our clients actually pay for our services, is with basic discounting controls. And they find that actually sales can increase because, well, we'll go to that in a minute. So that's the first reason, yep. Right? Is it's very fixable. The second is most companies have very little data on how much discounting really is happening within the organization. And the reason is because they record the contract at the net price. Mm-hmm. And so they can't go backwards and actually figure out what that is. So first of all, they don't know what the real price was because what was the price book at the time? On the contract, it says it's $65, but was that off from 100 or from 80 or from 70? And that takes a lot of recreation, usually by some talented FP&A folks who spend a lot of time and don't really get a very accurate answer. So they don't, first the net price recording. The other thing is that's price presentation. So if you were my customer and I gave you an invoice or I gave you a contract that said, my price is $100, but I'm giving you a $10 first year discount, and I'm giving you $10 multi-product discount, and I'm giving you a $10 other incentive, and your price is $70. When I come back for renewal, I can start with, okay, CJ, the first year discount goes away, right? And also, by the way, my list price has gone from 100 to 110. So now we're working from 110 and the 10% is gone. We're already at an increase in what you're going to pay. And then we can work through the other discounts, right? If I start with the net price, you are anchored at $70. So if I roll in and say, hey, I need to renew, you're like, hey, I want dollars off of 70.
Oh, you're at the wrong basis.
Right?
Wow.
So part of it is price presentation, and these systems, we do what was called price setting, which is figuring out what your price should be, what your product mix, what's your metric, and also price getting, which is what systems do you need? How is discounting controlled in your organization? What does price governance look like? So you need to do both sides to actually really get it right. So that's another reason why discounting is such a rich field. And then, discounting also, there's a lot of psychology of the customer. If you're a high discounting company, you need an event to actually change to being a low discounting company. You can't simply turn to your salespeople and say, I know routinely we have clients who do this. Routinely, we actually discount 50% off, but now I want you to do 30% off. Your salespeople are going to say, I've trained the industry, right? All my customers know that I have a 50% discount. So what you do instead is, JCPenney's learned this when they hired that guy from Apple. They hired the store guy from Apple, and he came in and he said, no more discounting at JCPenney's. But every JCPenney customer in the United States
they expect a discount.
Was discount and a sale. He said, no more sales, no more discounts. We're going to run this like an Apple store. They nearly went out of business, right? They got rid of him and they got somebody else. And he's like, yeah, okay, sales are back. And customers are like, oh, good. Okay, I can come back to JCPenney. And so if you are a high discounting company, then what we suggest is you need an event, a product release that actually, this is the new normal. And so you change your list price to actually be more in line with where you actually come out, and then you lower your discounting. And then you tell customers, yes, I did previously do how high discounts, but that was my old product line or my old version. And then in the new world, this is how we're going to work together. And then the other thing that happens with discounting is, especially if you're a larger enterprise, so we have very large enterprises, and Microsoft was a large enterprise. So CJ, you would have an account manager, right? CJ's personal account manager, Jason Kapp, we're good buddies, but I actually have line of business specialists who are helping me because I want you to buy my wall product, and I want you to buy my door product, and I want you to buy my parking lot products. And those are all different line of business sales guys. When I offer a big discount, they actually go fight it out between each other in the back room as to who's actually giving up that discount. And it's always the floor guy who loses, right? So he just hates these deals. And that actually really slows down deals. So we had a client, it took them 6 months to get a big customer a quote. About a week of that was talking to the end customer, and the rest of that time was the account manager and the line of business people fighting it out with product management, because there was no central pricing organization, fighting it out with product management about who was going to eat the discount. And so discounting less actually makes those fights less necessary.
So you remove some of the fights, but how should you think about evolving your discounting strategy over time if you go from, say, a one product company to a multi-product company? Because I do have to imagine that at the HQ level, there is some consideration that we want as much wallet share as possible.
Sure. So, the first realization is that most customers will have, if you're a multi-line company, they have a total number of dollars they're willing to give you. And it does not matter what you're selling them. You can sell them one product or 100 product. There's a maximum number of dollars they're willing to give you, and it's their internal share. Because the CIO has a pie chart that he gives the CFO, right? And it says each vendor. And if one segment of that pie is too big, the CFO is going to say no. Just no, we're not going to spend that much money. It kind of doesn't matter what it is. So you have to first understand, what is my maximum wallet and how is it that I can evolve my strategy so that maybe I can get the full share that I'm allowed to get and still be profitable. So part of that evolving it is just understanding your value proposition to the customer. So how can you sell into different parts of the customer? We had a client who had reached their maximum wallet share with the CIO. So they actually started selling to department heads. So they started selling directly to sales, a different product directly to sales, because sales had its own budget.
Had its own budget. That's so smart.
Yeah. And eventually the CFO rolled up what was happening across the company and came back and said, it's too much. But sales said, no, it's not too much. I don't know what the CIO is buying, but I need this product. And the CIO said, I don't know what sales is buying, but I need these products. And so it worked out for them.
That's a good one for all you sales guys out there. Don't stop just when the CFO says no. Go and find that person with the juicy budget at the department level.
Yeah, departments are great to sell to.
Do you have any frameworks to decide how much you should discount? Should that be something that just like annually is on a piece of paper and you pass it out? And like, if you're a VP, you can do this much. If you're a rep, you can do this much.
So we have a pricing maturity model. So it's a framework that actually has 3 life stages to it. It matches the life stage of your discounting to the life stage of either your product line, if you're an older company, or your company life, where your company is in maturity, if you're a younger company. And it gives you a good idea of how much you should be discounting. We modify it according to what industry you're in. So that's actually a good place to start. And then empowerment, we call it empowerment, which is how much do I give to the field person? How much do I give to the regional person? How much do I give to the head of sales? When do I need to talk to the CFO and to the CEO? And we do have a good framework for how you should distribute that. It starts with, what is your total discounting? Some companies, the total discount top to bottom is 20%. Other companies, total discount top to bottom is maybe 60%. And so it obviously changes depending on how many levels you have and what your total amount is.
Maybe an off-the-wall question, but how often should your pricing discount change, like with the macro environment? Are there like economic shocks or like I have to change my discounting policy here?
List prices should change with macroeconomic shocks. Discounting should stay the same. And that is also true of international. So what some companies do is they say, well, I'm going to have a list price of $100, but in Costa Rica, I'm going to give more discount to my guy because Costa Ricans don't have the same wallets. The Costa Rican businesses don't have the same wallets that the North American businesses do. And then in Japan, I'm going to give him a different amount of discounting because they have bigger wallets or smaller wallets. I don't know, whatever it is. And we say, don't do that. What you want to do is you want to uplift or downlift your price. So we have a base price of $100. And in Mexico, we're going to give a 20%, these numbers are made up, but we're going to give a 20% downlift because in our product category, that's the market price in Mexico. But in Europe, they actually have a tendency to pay. A willingness to pay is higher, or there's a regulation that we help solve for them, so their willingness to pay is higher. So we give an uplift of 20%. So now I've uplifted Europe and I've downlifted Mexico according to their economic status, and we try to use independent means like World Bank data or some data to tell us, independent of the company, what those uplifts and downlifts should be. But my discounting is limited to 30%, no matter where it is in the world. And that allows a CFO to look and say, discounting is out of control in Eastern US, but I really love what my guys in Mexico are doing because the percentages are normalized. Did I explain that well?
Yeah, and it's actually making me think that we did something wrong at a previous company I worked at where, for example, in Japan, culturally, they expected to get like an 80% discount. It was just like how they did business. And so we would lift our list price so much so we could offer this crazy discount, it was essentially like fake. Well, is that just because the customer needs to feel like they won? Is that what's going on?
Sometimes. So we know in the networking, so the networking business in the United States, telecommunications networking equipment, they have had high discounts for 30 or 40 years. And so it's very hard to change that attitude. Like that's just how that kind of works. There's some slow changes happening, but there are markets, either geographic markets or specific industries where high discounting is normal. But I would actually push on that pretty hard and say, I bet you that is a commonly held myth within the organization. And I will probably be able to point to one of your competitors that doesn't discount at all and is starting to eat your lunch.
There you have it. Oh, that would have kept me up at night, but luckily I don't work there anymore. So maybe as we gear towards a close, I got to ask you, you've been around the block when it comes to pricing, packaging, and what goes into just distributing a product. Do you have any crazy or wild stories from any of the client engagements or your time at Microsoft that you could just hit on?
Okay, yeah, so many stories. What ones are publishable? So we have had 2 clients where the same thing happened. We actually came in, they hired us, they said, hey, we think we need a new price or we need new packaging. And we came in and we do a survey. The first thing we do is we survey all their pricing systems. We survey their salespeople. It only takes about 2 weeks. It's pretty high quality. You get a lot of really great results from it. And some people stop there. They say, just do the survey and give me the recommendations. And we actually found in both cases, one case they had roughly 20% of revenue in unbilled overages, and the other case it was almost 40%. And we actually came back and said, hey, you have tens of millions of dollars in unbilled overages. We think you should go after that money. And in both cases, they did not believe that they actually had that much money. They believed that they were already charging for it. They assured us, one of the CEOs looked me in the face and said, we are charging for this. There is no unbilled overage. And I said, interesting. I know that you're being told that, but when you talk to the person who's in charge of those billings, he says that no bill has been issued in the last 2 years for that. And, so you cause a little bit of disruption in the organization. We said, and one of them was publicly listed and one of them was private. And we said, you really think you should go after this money? Let us help you. It'll not only pay for our engagement multiple times over, but it will really help your enterprise value. So that was one. Another one was we went into the corporate antibodies come out. So we went into a company that was PE owned, and they said, hey, we need to do some repackaging and we need to do some repricing. We worked really hard for them, and they were worth about $5 billion. And we went in, we know because they had actually taken somebody, they'd sold part of the company. So we knew what they were worth. There was a market price for what they were worth. We went in and we helped them, and we made, I want to say 16 or 17 recommendations, and their pricing manager shot them all down. Between the pricing manager and the head of product, they said, we don't want to do any of these things. The only thing that survived was the CFO saw the discounting one and said, we're going to do this discounting one. And they did the discounting one, and they took the plan, which by now the corporate antibodies had shot down, but that wasn't known to the C-suite. And they took that to another private equity company that wanted to buy them. And they got a 40% increase in 9 months in the value of the company because we had shown how they could unlock value, and they had actually implemented the discounting. And so therefore it was believable because they were already seeing the results around that. So that was kind of a funny thing.
Wow. That's a big uplift. I'd take that any day.
Yeah. We had a company come to us who, they were doing about $100 million in revenue, and they had gone to the marketplace to sell themselves. This was 4 or 5 years ago. And they had 2 parts of their business. One part couldn't sell. They got no price. They got a single bidder on the other price. He said, I'm going to buy that other part out of bankruptcy, and I'll give you almost nothing for this part. So they came to us and they said, can you help us? And we helped them rebuild their product offerings, and then helped them rebuild their product management organization, a little bit of engineering over 2 years. And they sold for 10x what that original bid. And we see that routinely. Pricing is wildly powerful. If it is worth putting effort into. I had a CEO that hired us, a venture capital based. It was a unicorn. And I said to him, so we'll call him John. His name is not John. I said, hey, John, so I just want to understand as we strategize what you want to do you want market share or do you want profitability? And he said, oh, I want both. And I said, no, this is an either or. You can either go for market share because you're going to have a very low price, very aggressive price vis-a-vis the competition. You're not going to make any money, but you're going to have a lot of market share, right? Or we can actually help you with a price that there is a segment of the market we'll buy from you because you have a very nice product for that segment, but you won't make, you'll make a ton of money, but you actually won't have much market share. And he said, your job is to get me both things. Wow. And I was like, well, if I could do that, I would not be a consultant.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of stories of people killing perfectly profitable proposals just because they didn't want to build that, or they thought, sales wasn't on board, or sales was on board, but product wasn't. A lot of infighting that can be solved just by a very practical approach. We often come in behind very famous consulting firms that people spend a lot of money on. And when we get there, they say, hey, we hired so-and-so, and they had 15 people here. They had a partner, and they had an engagement manager, and they had 10 people who were graduated in the last 2 years from MBA school. And they gave us this PowerPoint, and they give me a PowerPoint. It's like 300 slides, and it's beautiful work. And I say, oh, it's beautiful work. And they say, yeah, we don't understand it. We can't implement it. And I say, well, how long have you had this? And they said, they've had about a year. And so we roll in with 2 or 3 guys. We don't have a leverage model. So everybody is experienced. They're in their 40s or 50s. They've sat in the seat. They've done the job. We roll in and we say, all right, here's the 4 things that you can do. And you make sure that it gets implemented. And it's just crazy how much money people spend on consulting projects that never get implemented. I would encourage everyone to make sure that if you hire a pricing consultant, you hire them all the way through implementation so that you have an outcome-based engagement.
Don't leave the PowerPoint deck on the shelf.
No.
Pricing is indeed powerful. I have to thank you for all these anecdotes, for lending us a view into your experience and some of the really powerful things you've seen in the world of pricing and packaging. If people want more of Jason, or they're looking for some help on their own strategy, where can they find you?
BlueRocket.io.
Cool.
All right.
Jason, thanks for being generous with your time.
Thank you, CJ.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.